Secretary Pelham mentioned this earlier. The state doesn't sort of follow its own rules, all right, when it comes to growth management. So we've never articulated an urban policy. Another important point to make is that just because our big cities did well in the 1990s compared to their peers doesn't mean they're doing well. If you look at the poverty rates in Miami, in Fort Lauderdale, in Tallahassee, in our big cities, and not so big cities, it's a real awful thing. And poverty it continues to be a big problem. We continue to be, our urban areas, generally speaking, don't fare as well as a number of other states that we aspire to. If you go to our downtowns, we've got a lot of wonderful, lovely, great downtowns, but they have a long way to go. Our central cities still have a long way to go. Let's see. So, cities, yes, and urban policy. I'm sorry, I make sure I hit all my main points. I did. So, I want to keep us moving along, Jim. I'll turn it back to you.
Otherwise known as the Orlando metropolitan area, have changed over time within the context of Florida's growth management framework. But sometime between reading their work and getting to the task of summarizing their contribution and commenting on it, I came across an article by Wells Tower in the New York Times Style magazine, Travel Winter 2007, where Mr. Tower begins with a tongue-in-cheek assessment of Florida and Orange County, the subject of their study in particular, from the outside. He says it takes many fingers to count all the allurements Florida claims for itself. According to assorted tourist literature, the state simultaneously contains the winter strawberry capital of the world in Plant City, the indoor foliage capital of the world in Apopka, the lightning capital of the world, the entire state, among lots of other capitals of the world, including the cigar, the nudist, the possum, the shark attack, the gold, the Scientology, and the sponge. Driving through the fabulous fun capital of the world, Orlando, Mr. Tower continues, I was struck by the thought that Florida should probably add to the list a planetary title for human perversity. There is something wondrously upside down about a state to which people flock purportedly for its climate and natural loveliness, but where most of that loveliness has been drained and converted into rooms to goes and scratch and dent worlds, and where most of the residents feel about air conditioning the way astronauts feel about spaceships. I bring this travel writer's comments up front because it seems more rather than fewer people have either embraced that vision of our state or have resigned themselves to it. And despite the fact that Florida is touted perhaps accurately by the planning community as the growth management capital of the world, we need to be aware of the limitations that have evolved over time, and more importantly than that, move on to more effectively address the goals that were originally set out by the framers of that act, namely to discourage the proliferation of sprawl, encourage compact form, smart growth, and all the rest. Knapp and Song's examination of urban form in Orange County begins with a three-pronged analysis. First, they construct measures of urban form for 5 distinct metropolitan areas across the United States, which include Orange County, Maricopa County, Arizona, Montgomery County in Maryland, Minneapolis-St. Paul, Minnesota, and Portland, Oregon. Their measures include street network design, land use intensity, land use pattern. Then they identify all the single-family homes and measure the urban form characteristics of all the neighborhoods developed after 1995. And finally, they estimate the date when each neighborhood in Orange County was built and examine trends in urban development patterns to assess whether development is becoming more or less consistent with the principles of smart growth. Now, despite the fact that I had trouble with their measurement tools because they pretty much weren't comprehensive enough, in my opinion, and I'll get into that a little bit, their findings do provide a snapshot of the situation in Orange County. 1, dwelling unit sizes are increasing as lot sizes are decreasing. 2, neighborhoods are slightly more connected internally, at least for cars, but more regionally isolated. And this was a problem I had with their measurement tool, talking about internal and external connectivity and this whole concept of smart growth, but yet avoiding any aspect of the pedestrian environment and measuring everything simply in the context of automobiles. Neighborhoods becoming more homogeneous with fewer homes within walking distance of commercial uses. Now they measure all this and they state all of this, and to me these findings don't really paint a very pretty picture of Orlando, and they're pretty consistent with the tourist brochures, the tourist articles, assessment of it. Their conclusion, they note several significant limitations to their own approach. They state that their classification of neighborhood types only focuses on the physical neighborhood form without consideration of social or economic characteristics. They also were not able to examine trends in multifamily developments due to data limitations. And finally, they make it clear that it is impossible to generalize the results for Orange County to the rest of the state. Well, that should be obvious. Their findings seem to support the lack of a consistent theme or framework for effectively managing urban growth. To paraphrase an excerpt, with the exception of concurrency, this lack of coherence and consistency is evident in Orange County, where intergovernmental complexity mixes with large-scale project development and continuous rapid growth. Although every jurisdiction in the county has a plan, it is hard to characterize overall growth in the county as well planned. Now, while the authors state all that, I feel that they're overly gracious and even generous in offering up that by comparison with the other 4 metropolitan areas, Orange County's results are commendable or even exemplary. They conclude that there is considerable room for improvement, and that's where I focus, because I would like to reiterate those last 3 words in their chapter, room for improvement, not rooms to go. Not only does their study point to the need for a more metropolitan perspective for managing growth, it also suggests we need better tools to measure and evaluate urban form in order to gain a deeper understanding of the degree to which we are successful in designing away sprawl and protecting our unique natural environment. My own take on this generally follows the view shared by several of my colleagues in the design professions, as presented by Peter Calthorpe and William Fulton in the book, The Regional City Planning for the End of Sprawl. In that book, they analyzed the Growth Management Act of Florida and compared to other growth management acts in the country. They state first that Florida's growth management law over time did not directly address the physical form of metropolitan growth, and evidence of that is all around us. Second, concurrency has been implemented almost exclusively as motor vehicle concurrency, even subjecting public transit facilities to those very requirements. And this was coming from the Transportation and Land Use Study Committee final report, which was published in 1999. Report on Land Use and Transportation Planning in Florida. Third, the legislation, as it is evolved, does not sufficiently encourage local governments to stop competing with one another and start working together regionally, especially critical in all of our largest multi-county metropolitan regions, Orlando, Tampa, St. Petersburg, and South Florida. Finally, sprawl cannot be combated by bureaucracy alone. The metropolitan perspective is really not a perspective at all. It is more like multiple simultaneous perspectives operating at various scales and resolutions from the region to the neighborhood. To combat sprawl and inequity, we may need to focus not only on the form of development, as Knapp and Song have thoroughly done, but also on the form of transportation as a major determinant in the resulting urban form, expanding beyond the motor vehicle to pedestrian levels of service or to transit levels of service. We need to develop better tools to measure and effectively analyze and manage redevelopment and conservation of existing urban and suburban areas. For example, South Florida in particular is quite different than Orlando, in that it no longer perceives itself as land rich, as Orlando does in many other areas of the state. And we have to find more effective ways to prevent the unintended negative consequences of competition between local governments. On a final note, and in order to tidy this up from the beginning, it's worth noting that ironically, the fabulous fund capital of the world, the subject of the chapter, is largely fueled by the Reedy Creek Improvement District, the Disney enterprise, which the authors do mention at the beginning of their chapter. This is perhaps the most sophisticated example of a transit-oriented environment designed for pedestrians that one can think of, with its car-free networks of monorails, trolleys, sidewalks, and promenades that comfortably handle up to 50,000 people a day at Walt Disney World alone, and 110,000 people on average at all 4 theme parks. It's an example we might consider objectively in terms of urban form of what can be achieved given a clear, multi-scale design vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Our final critical analysis will be presented by Dr. Alka Sapat from our college. She'll be critiquing Chapter 11. Are we safer? An evaluation of Florida's hurricane hazard mitigation planning mandates. I would also put this in the context of hazard mitigation and the issues have really, in the last year or two, for Florida, taken on a new context. As I think Governor Chris has asked us to deal with global climate change and sea level rise. I think these issues are fast becoming very important to the future growth management plan.
Thank you all. I promise I'm going to be brief. I know it's being the last speaker. You probably want me to finish quickly.